Hello, everybody, and thank you for joining our virtual call to action on the pandemic of Black student debt. My name is Wisdom Cole. I'm the National Organizing Manager for the NAACP Youth College Division. It is so great to see all of you in the chat, sending greetings from all across the country. Thank you all so much for being on our call to action tonight. We are so excited to have you. We have an amazing panel for you tonight of amazing special guests, of researchers, activists, organizers, policymakers who are making change and thinking about what it means to really tackle on Black student loan debt. In tonight's virtual call to action, we are going to have a short address by our director, Tiffany Dean Lofton. And then after that, we're going to go into our panel where each guest will make some remarks about the Black student loan debt. So first, I'd like to introduce Tiffany Dean Lofton, our director of the NAACP Youth and College Division. Let's make some noise for her in the chat.
Thank you so much, Wisdom. Good evening, everybody. I hope everybody is somewhere safe, that you are feeling full, that your spirit and your mind is right. I'm so excited. Look, y'all are really making noises in the chat. I love it. I am so excited about this conversation we're going to have tonight, not only because of all of you who are joining, but because the moment right now is so spectacular. I've been working on the issue of student loan debt and access and affordability for higher education, particularly for our community, for Black folks, for 12 years now. And I remember being a first year in college, talking about student loan debt being canceled and forgiven, and talking about interest rates, and talking about the FAFSA. And here we are in 2020 in the wedge of an election and a pandemic that has forced us to have a conversation, not just about student debt as it pertains to all borrowers. We want to have the conversation tonight about how it impacts Black borrowers, Black students, and Black youth across the country who want to pursue higher education. This conversation that we're going to have tonight, we're trying to make sure that we throw all of the facts to you about things you need to know so that you can help us spread the message and educate the masses about why Black student loan debt needs to be the conversation we have, not only in our communities, but also legislatively. And also, I want you to meet all of my friends tonight who are going to be bringing to you new findings, new conversations, new talking points, and uplifting all of the call to actions that we're going to be having after this call, because it's not just about a town hall. We're going to ask you all to take action after this. We want you to be the leadership on the ground who's helping us move this conversation forward and help us fight for solutions. Listen, I know there's so much going on right now in the world. What we're going to talk about tonight is critical, not just for the folks who currently have student loan debt, but for the folks who are going into school, who will be signing those contracts and who want to make sure that they can graduate and not have to worry about this burden. This country right now, more than ever, can meet that challenge, can make that change. And we have some phenomenal folks tonight to help us to do that. So on behalf of the leadership of the NAACP, my boss, President Derek Johnson, the leadership of the board of directors, and all of the students that we work with and represent on a daily basis across the country, welcome to tonight's conversation. I'm so excited about it. You can make sure that you tune in on not only on our YouTube page and you registered, but also follow us on Instagram and on Twitter at NAACPYC_. Again, that's NAACPYC_. We're going to be live tweeting and having the conversation from there. And I'm going to pass it back to our moderator, Wisdom. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Tiffany, for that wonderful introduction. So we're getting ready to engage into our panel tonight. We're so excited. A few ground rules we want to set aside. All of you are already engaging the chat, and I love it. I love to see all the comments. Definitely feel free to use that to connect with one another, to talk, to engage. We also have a question and answer panel at the bottom, and so you can drop a question there. At the end of the panel, we'll actually field some questions that you put in there. So first person I'd like to introduce is Dr. Tiffany Jones, who is a phenomenal researcher. She is the Senior Director of Higher Education Policy at EdTrust, and her team promotes policy to make higher education more affordable, hold colleges accountable, and invest in student success. Please show some love for Dr. Tiffany Jones in the chat. Go ahead, Dr. Tiffany.
Great. Thank you all for having me this evening. Honored to be among the other great panelists, and just thank you to the NAACP for making this conversation possible. I'm just going to talk for a few minutes about the Black student debt crisis. What is the problem contributing to this crisis, and how should that inform what we think about as we try to come up with solutions as a community? First, just to get us started thinking about the problem, I mean, racist stereotyping would suggest that Black people don't value education, but we know that's not true. The evidence suggests that we've always valued education and invested in education, and in many cases to pay a much higher price for it. And how that translates in higher education, for example, in over 17 states, paying for a public four-year university takes up about 40% of the median household income for Black families, where that it only takes up about 23% for white families. That's just one example of Black people having to make more of a sacrifice or pay more for public higher education. Black students on average are more likely to have to borrow for college. They have to borrow more, and they struggle more often with repaying their student loans, and they're more likely to default on their student loans than their peers. So default is a word that's just something that occurs after a borrower is over 270 days late for their student debt payments. It's the most disastrous financial outcome that could come from missing your student debt payments. It not only ruins a person's credit, it makes future borrowing more expensive. It can make it harder to get a job, rent an apartment, or buy a house or even a car. Half of Black borrowers who entered college in 2003 defaulted on their student loans within 12 years. And again, protective factors like actually completing your college degree or coming from a family with a high income, which would normally shield borrowers from that worst outcome, don't necessarily protect Black borrowers. In fact, a black person with a bachelor's degree is more likely to default on student loans than a white college dropout. And in fact, Black students from the highest income families default at rates 7 times higher than their white peers. And again, I'm sharing these statistics to demonstrate even among Black people with more means, their struggle is much greater than their white peers with similar means. And that's important because often people like to think that this is a particular problem related to Black people being more likely to be low income, and that's just not true. This is also about race and the impact of racism and creating a context in which Black borrowers across the income spectrum continue to struggle. So what are some of the factors that kind of fuel this crisis? Black student debt is not some big mistake that Black people made. It's a response to the price of participation in higher education compared to this. Higher education is more important than ever, but it's also more expensive than ever. Nearly all the new jobs created since the last recession required some sort of post-secondary degree or credential. So it's almost as if higher education is required, but at the same time, it's unaffordable. Students and families did not overborrow. The prices for higher education have increased, and the financial support did not keep up. It remained the same, or in some cases even decreased. And just that is the Pell Grant. It's the largest financial aid program. 2/3 of Black students in higher ed are qualified to get at least some portion of a Pell Grant, but the maximum amount you can get does not cover enough. Back in the day, the Pell Grant used to cover the majority of the cost of attending public college or university, and today it covers less than 1/3. Also, what's happened over time is states have spent less on higher education, and they've always spent less on the colleges and universities Black students are more likely to attend, such as community colleges or even historically Black colleges and universities. That means that states are spending about $1,000 less per student on Black students compared to white students. Also, policymakers haven't protected Black students and families from predatory colleges and universities. And some of these colleges saddle students with debt and leave them without a degree. And the result is, so for example, 3 out of the 4 students that attend for-profit colleges or universities who leave before earning their degree end up defaulting on their student loans. Just to demonstrate the relationship between the behavior of some of the predatory colleges and then what ends up happening to Black students who attend and borrow there. There's also the racial wealth gap, the legacy of slavery, Jim Crow, racist federal housing policy, combined with ongoing discrimination in employment and lending, have effectively prevented many Black families from building wealth through home ownership, leaving them with a fraction of the wealth of their white peers. And so today, white households have about 10 times the wealth of Black households. This means when it's time to make a student loan payment, Black people are less likely to have family members who have extra resources that help them make those payments, to provide them with financial cushion as they transition from higher education into the job market and try to get themselves established financially. College education and earning a college degree does improve the economic trajectory of Black students, but it does not eliminate the impact of racism. Black households headed by individuals with a bachelor's degree or higher have a lower net worth than the typical white household headed individual with a high school diploma or less. Just demonstrating again, going to college does benefit Black students and families, but understanding that they're not dealing with approaching it in the same way in terms of being able to have available resources to help them pay for college up front, of course, address the burden of repayment when they're finished. And so what does this mean? It means that we need bold solutions to deal with the Black student debt problem of today and to make sure it doesn't happen again in the future. That means that we should be talking about debt cancellation in some form, especially for those who struggle the most to repay their loans, and that includes Black borrowers in particular. Also means when policymakers are thinking about how to target or construct their debt cancellation policies, they should be very careful about using very strict income limits, because as discussed, there are Black students who are middle and upper income who continue to struggle as well. Also, it's really important to be thinking about how to eliminate the need for students to have to borrow in the first place. This means that the Pell Grant needs to be at least doubled to try to keep up with the costs of attending higher education. That means in conversations about how to implement something like free college or debt-free college, that there has to be a full conversation about tuition as well as the full cost of attendance. So that means housing, transportation, books, and fees should be a part of that. Being able to afford a 4-year college or university as well as a 2-year college should also be a part of conversations around debt-free college as well, especially as a bachelor's degree is so critical to us Black people being able to move up the economic ladder. And again, the last thing I'll say in regards to some of the solutions conversations is this was not an accident. It's not a coincidence that Black students struggle more with student debt. Again, it was the result of racist policymaking and racism in higher ed, as well as in the job market. This means that exploratory conversations even that are happening around things like reparations should also incorporate a focus on how to make college affordable and how to deal with the existing debt burdens for Black students and families as a part of those early conversations. And again, there's still a lot to learn about the specifics about how this crisis is impacting Black students and families. And so the Education Trust, and along with some partners at the University of Pennsylvania, are beginning a study on Black student debt, and we encourage you to reach out and to have your voices heard at edtrust.org/Black student debt if you would like to participate in that study. But thank you so much for your time and looking forward to the conversation.
Thank you so much, Dr. Tiffany Jones. I really, really appreciate your words and your actions and all the research you do. You are a phenomenal Black researcher, phenomenal Black woman, and thank you so much for being on our call to action tonight. So our next speaker for tonight is, I gotta say, one of the flyest and dopest professors that I know. Dr. Charles H.F. Davis III is an assistant professor of clinical education at the University of Southern California and the former chief strategy officer and director of research at the USC Race and Equity Center. I'm gonna need y'all to smash that like button. If you're watching on YouTube, definitely follow back. Definitely follow him on Instagram and Twitter because he has an amazing commentary about the things going on in life. And so, Dr. Charles Davis, the floor is yours.
I should know this from having to do Zoom every single week for classes, not to mute yourself when you're trying to talk. I swear I do this for real. But Wiz, thank you so much for that amazing introduction. I'm gonna have to take you on the road with me and just hype me up, man. You got me in the perfect position to deliver some comments. I just want to thank the NAACP primarily, and also just being in this amazing intellectual cadre of Black women. I feel fortunate to be in this space with you, so thank you for the opportunity to contribute a little bit to this conversation. I will do my best to follow the expertise of Dr. Jones, who laid out really just the landscape of what we're dealing with and the magnitude at a statistical level. And so when I think about what's been going on with the Black student debt crisis, there is this larger national backdrop, which I think Dr. Jones is alluding to, about the ways in which public institutions, excluding HBCUs specifically, and talking about our predominantly white institutions, are overwhelmingly failing Black students. When we think about the student debt crisis, even when we talk about it as the student debt crisis, the burden is placed on the students as if they themselves are doing something wrong, when in fact institutions, organizations, and agencies have failed to answer the call, as Barbara Jordan once said, to be as good as their promise. And so when we think about the national backdrop of colleges and universities, that they are often failing to have what one call it the USC Race and Equity Center, an issue about representational equity. And that is the extent to which young Black people are able to be represented at the same level they are represented in society, also on campus. Even more so, the experiences that they have once they're on campus, that the experiential inequities dealing with things like campus racism in the classroom and in social spaces in and around campus are dramatically different than what we see for not just other non-Black groups of color, but specifically white students. And so there's something very insidious about having to acquire the level of debt when we think about the numbers that Dr. Jones laid out for us, when we're not even delivering on what we're supposed to from the educational standpoint, that our success indicators aren't where they should be, in part because we're not delivering the high level of service that is needed, yes, for all students, but for Black students in particular. And so moving sort of beyond that particular landscape, as we're thinking about what it is that students are going through on the day-to-day, with our research that is in partnership with the NAACP, we've been conducting some focus groups with students from around the country. We had the opportunity to join the National Youth Work Committee to engage in some conversations just last year, in which we were really trying to find out what are the sort of qualitative aspects, right? So we heard a lot about the statistics and the numbers, but what are some of those experiences and some of the psychological things that are happening as a result of debt? So what the research tells us is that debt generally in terms of acquisition is a burden psychologically for folks. And so when we think about that in the student debt conversation, that even acquiring debt as early as being a freshman and moving throughout your trajectory, that's something that weighs on you significantly. And what we heard in our focus group consistently was that there was a certain emotional trauma attached to going into debt before having even started their young adult life or started their career. And so we, again, return to Dr. Jones's numbers about what the job market looks like, that there aren't viable opportunities, that there's constant discrimination and prejudice in the hiring practices, that folks are going into what Jaleel Bishop has sort of framed as debt traps that are almost unavoidable, right? If we think of higher education as a pathway to a better future, that it almost is always already required of us to assume this level of debt that we are, again, not able to repay at the same level as our white counterparts, in part because we cannot necessarily be employed. And so in addition to that, we also heard folks talking about the psychological toll it takes on their parents and their families, right? We know for many of us, myself included, that our parents sometimes co-sign for some of these things through the Parent Plus loan, right? And so there's also this familial aspect in which, one, there's a burden of what is being invested, the risks that are being taken by families. And we've all heard it. I think, many of us heard when we were sent off to school that, one, don't go down there and embarrass me, right? And two, make sure you earn that degree. And so with those, sort of familial ties, we wanted to make sure that we did our folks proud. But how can we do our folks proud when we're actually entrapping them with us with this cycle of debt, right? That in many ways allows people not to escape poverty, or perhaps even for some, that's to live in that based on low wage jobs that they are even access to after they are able to attain their degree. And so I think it's really important that we not just think about the financial implications, but what are the psychological and socio-emotional implications of having to carry this debt for many of us for decades, right? Even for someone who's gainfully employed, who makes a decent amount of money, when I think about where that money could otherwise be spent in trying to build and develop a family, to put down on a house as a young adult, that these are things for our generation that are simply not really available to us. And I would actually go as far to say that the student debt crisis for Black students in this generation is equally as detrimental, equally as violent as the subprime and mortgage crisis of those generations past. So I think it's really important that we keep our eye on how we're feeling, and that we're in tune with that sense of our not just self-care, but collective care, how we're taking care of each other, and how student debt really challenges our ability to do that. In addition, a couple of things that I just want to mention are sort of the ways that we can think about getting involved. And so most of my work sort of focuses on the role of student activism and advocacy within higher education and its broader communal context. And one thing we know for sure, just as any transformative social change that's taking place in this nation, that it first starts with young people who are on the ground. And so I encourage you all to be engaged in this conversation as activists and as advocates, as much as we've seen from the Debt Collective, we've seen from the Coalition of the Movement for Black Lives, that really placed Black student debt as a crisis front and center, so that legislators such as Congressman Presley, who's joined us and is leading up legislation right now to take on this issue, really made that possible. And so that is where we have to focus a lot of our efforts, especially for those that have otherwise been disenfranchised from the political process, those that have not had gainful access to engage in electoral politics in meaningful ways, especially when we have difficulty coming around the candidates we feel that best support our agenda, and ultimately are left with candidates that we have to choose from. So we need to be able to push from the ground up for those that may be the presumptive nominees to ensure that our agenda is front and center, that you cannot get our votes without focusing on our issues. And young people that are at the head of these movements and movement spaces are those that are definitely in a position to do that. So in building on our work as we're continuing to move forward with the NAACP, we're looking forward to continuing our focus group studies, as well as taking a sort of a consistent look at what the trajectory of legislation has been over time, how that's had a huge impact for some and not so much as for others. And we look forward to engaging with you all as we continue down that process. So I will yield the rest of my time. So again, this amazing group of Black women, and thank you all for listening.
Dr. Davis, thank you so much. You're getting mad love in the comments, and I appreciate always having you, be able to talk with you about these issues. Just really quickly, just to Dr. Davis and Dr. Jones, I really appreciate y'all being on this call to action tonight, because it really shows that Black scholars matter, right? As an aspiring Black PhD, I look to both of you as folks who've made a way for us to be in institutions of higher education. So thank y'all so much for being on this call and all the work and research y'all do. Again, as we continue in this virtual town hall tonight, I want to invite everybody to put questions in the Q&A box. So if you are currently right now on Zoom, you can go to the bottom of your screen where it says Q&A, click the button and put a question. And after our next two panelist speakers, we will answer the questions. So our next speaker that I'm going to introduce is a phenomenal woman creating change, advocating for young Black people constantly. Congresswoman Presley was elected to represent Massachusetts' 7th Congressional District in the US House of Representatives, making her the first woman of color to be elected to the Congress from the Commonwealth of Massachusetts. She has been an incredible voice for student debt relief and proposed legislation immediately to cancel at least $30,000 in outstanding student loan debt for borrowers who relied on federal student loans, right? I know that would help me a lot and a lot of people that I know. So Congresswoman Ayanna Presley, the floor is yours.
All right, okay. Can you guys hear me? I'm good? All right, great. Wisdom, thank you so much. Thank you for that very humbling introduction. And, you know, it just reminds me of my last city council hearing as a Boston city councilor. It was with youth to talk about trauma. And a young Black man, 16 years old, stood up and he said, you know, I've lived long enough to see our first Black governor in Massachusetts, our first Black president, and you elected as the first Black woman to the city council, and now the first person of color and Black woman to represent us in Congress. And he said, I need you to be more than a first. And so, you know, I think of that every day, and I'm really doing my best in partnership with all of you to honor that, to be more than a first. And policy really is my love language. And why is that? Because the inequities and disparities that have been so eloquently enumerated by our Black scholars, can we give it up to Black genius just for a moment? You know, already in our convening this evening, those things didn't just happen organically. You know, hate and discrimination and injustice were codified in policy. So we have to be intentional and deliberate in dismantling structural racism. And so how do I express and demonstrate my love for Black folk, for Black people, for us, is through policy. But that policy is only as good as its connectedness to those closest to the pain. You know, I've always believed that people closest to the pain should be the closest to the power, driving and informing the policy making. And so Tiffany, I just want to thank you for your leadership in convening this virtual table. You know, while we're all physically distancing in the interest of public health, it's really important that we continue to build community, but also that our mobilization efforts and our momentum it does not cease, you know, in the midst of this, that we continue to fight and to organize for policies that center the dignity and the humanity of all Black folks, and our prosperity as well. I also would be remiss, since I am in Boston, big ups to Boston. We are the first chartered branch of the NAACP, and my husband Conan and I are lifetime members. So I just wanted to say that. And eventually we will be home, whether it's virtually or physically, to the next convention. Absolutely. So I did, okay, so I do just want to acknowledge that. And again, you know, Tiffany, you were saying you've been banging the drum on this issue for a long time and probably felt unheard for a long time, sort of a canary in the coal mine. But I think the fact that this is now an integrated part of the national discussion is a testament to the disruptive and sustainable organizing by you and so many others. So I hope folks feel empowered in that, and just to keep amplifying your voices. And some might say, well, we all get this issue, so you're sort of preaching to the choir. Well, there's power in that too, because we need the choir to stay fortified, and we need you to sing. And that's how we keep this movement going. And that's how we advance policy. And so in this moment of unprecedented hurt, I really do believe what it demands of all of us is unprecedented organizing, unprecedented mobilizing, and because policy is my love language, unprecedented legislating to ensure that our nation's response reflects the urgency of this moment and the lived experiences of our community. And truthfully, the student debt crisis is one that uniquely impacts the Black community. But for too long, the narrative has excluded us and the unique ways in which this debt has exacerbated racial and economic inequities, compounding our gender and our racial wealth gap. Now, as the experts and researchers have shared with us already so vividly today, our Black community is disproportionately shouldering the burden of our nation's 1.6 trillion student debt crisis. And I know many people recognize Massachusetts as a mecca for higher education. We have 855,000 federal borrowers here. And 10% of our federal borrowers in the $1.6 trillion student debt crisis are private borrowers. But in Massachusetts alone, we have 855,000 federal borrowers. And we have to borrow Black folks at higher rates, just for a shot at the same degree as our white counterparts. Black women in particular bear the largest burden as we are forced to take on higher student debt loads, all while navigating a persistent wage gap that allows Black women to earn just 61 cents to every dollar earned by a white man. So these are systemic barriers that make it significantly more challenging to repay this debt. This debt is literally choking at the promise of Black families. It's compromising our ability to start a family or a business, to buy a home, to save for retirement, and again, exacerbating, to the doctor's point, the mental health crisis in our country, because debt is heavy in every way. The impact of this debt takes just as much of an emotional toll on our families as it does an economic one. But these realities didn't happen overnight. They are the consequences of failed policies that have only exacerbated deeply entrenched racial and economic inequities that have persisted for generations. In the district that I represent, the Massachusetts 7th, in a 3-mile radius, median household income drops by $50,000 from Cambridge to Roxbury, the Blackest part of my district, $50,000, right? And the average wealth for a Black household here in Boston is $8, right? So these inequities didn't just happen overnight. They've been a long time in the making. Failed policy that has resulted in the chronic underfunding of our nation's HBCUs, our community colleges and state universities, the same institutions that have historically been our engines for economic mobility, have instead had to raise tuition to cover skyrocketing costs, forcing Black families to borrow more in order to foot the bill. Failed policy that has allowed an entire, as was referenced earlier, predatory for-profit college industry to make record profits while disproportionately targeting our lowest income and most vulnerable students, leaving them with heaps of debt, low quality degrees, and bad credit. Many of these failures stemmed from our last financial crisis, when our legislators decided to bail out Wall Street at the expense of Black and brown families. And now we see ourselves headed towards something very similarly while we're managing and navigating a crisis within a crisis, a public health crisis and an economic crisis. And so our families lost everything. Our communities have yet to recover from the last crisis, and we are the least prepared to face the one that we are in right now. This pandemic has shed light on these structural inequities and failed policies. And I know I'm a broken record. I keep saying structural because I don't want us to forget ever that these things are systemic. And so systemic problems demand and require systemic solutions. So I can't underscore that enough. And I also just want to say that I reject any verbiage that says it'll be great when we can return to normal. Normal was never good enough. Normal was already insufficient, inadequate, and unjust. So we will not return to normal because that normal was already failing us. The normal that failed to recognize this crisis as an emergency in the first place and instead blamed the 45 million borrowers left to struggle on their own. The fact of the matter is that this crisis stemmed from policy, which intentionally left our communities behind. But with the political will and courage, and with the will of the people organizing in partnership with us to center those most impacted, we can right these wrongs through intentional policy that ensures that our economy works for everyone, which is why we can't tinker around the edges. We need bold reforms that reflect the urgency of this moment and respond to the unprecedented hurt that our communities are experiencing. A response that ensures that no family will have to make the choice between paying a student loan or keeping food on the table. A response that guarantees everyone a chance to recover. But none of this is truly possible unless we grant across the board student debt cancellation. Now, this is why I've partnered with my sister in service and my colleague, Representative Ilhan Omar. And there are 4 pieces of legislation that I could lift up that I've been working on in this space well before COVID-19. But for right now, I'm just going to lift up that we introduced the Student Debt Emergency Relief Act, which would cancel $30,000 in student loan debt for all federal loan borrowers. And again, that's the average amount of debt that a borrower is saddled with, about $30,000. So considering the disproportionate impact that the student debt crisis has on Black families, student debt cancellation will help reduce the racial wealth gap and help free up much needed resources that Black families can use to save for retirement, buy a home, start a business, or use their purchasing power to support Black business. I know I am so tired that the dollar only stays in the Black community for 6 hours. That is completely unacceptable. So these are all key investments in wealth building and equity building. So cancellation can help jumpstart the economy, help families invest money back into services and goods that will help to fuel our local economy. These are the long-term recovery efforts our community needs and deserves. And might I just add that there's nothing benevolent or charitable about any of this. It's reciprocity. It's what we are owed. And so I very much appreciate the doctor putting a reparations lens around this. And I'll say that our colleagues across the aisle, Mitch McConnell in particular, is often saying that he's so tired of the liberals trying to shoehorn in their wish list of things in the midst of this pandemic and that it's all too expensive. If it's a liberal wish list, then so be it. I will continue to wish and most importantly work to ensure that our recovery efforts do not abandon the Black community. If it's too expensive, I would like to remind folks that Congress has now invested $3 trillion with a T, dollars in relief efforts. Instead of investing in our most vulnerable, the GOP has demanded resources for large corporations and the wealthy. Our greatest wealth is the health and economic security of all our people. All our people. So we are witnessing firsthand the consequences of a recovery which prioritizes greed over people, and we cannot repeat this same mistake. So let me just close by underscoring this. If you care about racial justice, then you need to care about student debt cancellation. If you care about economic justice, then you need to care about student debt cancellation. This connects housing justice. I'll just connect it to everything. This is central to all of it. So I'll end there. Again, I'm honored to be a part of this virtual table and this discussion, and appreciate you all immensely. And I look forward to the dialogue.
Thank you so much, Congressman Presley, for that. The point you made, I love that you're talking about policy is your love language. I'm so happy to have people like you fighting for us every single day. Real quick, for everybody who's in the comments, if you believe that we need to cancel student debt now, put cancel student debt now. Go ahead and tweet it, put it on Instagram, let your friends know, let your parents know, let your family know. We need to cancel student debt now. That was an amazing speech and amazing remarks you gave there. And I'm so glad that we were able to have you on our virtual town hall tonight. Next up, we have an amazing student activist who is part of our National Youth Work Committee and is our representative for Region 6. She's coming out of Dallas, Texas, and she is also an essential worker and a nurse. Let's give it up for all our essential workers. She's also a member of Delta Sigma Theta Sorority Incorporated. So all my Deltas, I'm definitely gonna need you to comment, like, and show some love for Brandy Fields. The floor is yours.
Thank you for that introduction, Wisdom. All right, so in regards to student debt, as you guys, as Wisdom stated before, I am a member of NAACP and I'm a representative of Region 6 from the great state of Texas. So in regards to student debt, what we're doing on a national level, I can't even speak a whole lot because I feel like Dr. Tiffany Jones and Dr. Charles and Congresswoman Ayanna Pressley pretty much hit on everything. As being a freedom fighter, we are strongly advocating, and we're not just advocating and posting stuff on social media. We are actually putting our words to work. We are writing down, we are coming up with policies because just like Congresswoman Ayanna Pressley stated, we want to be able to invest in the Black dollar. We want to be able to own our businesses. We want to be able to own homes in the near future. And with all this student loan debt, it's not going to be able to happen. Me personally, I graduated 2 years ago from the University of Texas at Arlington with my bachelor's degree in nursing. And even with graduating and even when I was in high school, like, student loan debt is the main reason why I chose my college of choice. If I could go back and do it all over again, I would choose my dream school when I was a senior was FAMU. I wanted to go to HBCU and, do all the fun stuff. But at the same time, I just knew I didn't want to take out so much student loans to obtain a bachelor's of science and nursing degree. So I went to school in Texas. I went to one school and then I ended up transferring to the University of Texas at Arlington. And even then that was a big choice because I was a commuter student. So I still saved money. I still, by doing that, I saved money, but I still had to take out student loans because even at that point, I was raised in a 2-parent household and the government said that my parents made too much money. So I didn't get a chance to receive any of the Pell Grants or any of those free money that is offered by the federal. So I had to take out actual loans. And even when I did take out the actual loans, I still had to come out of pocket for more money for tuition. And when I got to nursing school, it was even worse. Everything was just going up. So as I graduated now, I'm paying on my student loans with the pandemic that is going on. I checked the little website. I didn't even know, but they stopped the payment till November. And honestly, they can stop the payment for forever. But that's just me. I feel like if, they didn't feel like this virus was important enough to cause attention to, I don't think my loans is that important enough to cause attention to. But even then, being that I am a nurse, they do have programs out there to receive loan forgiveness, but they even make that even impossible to receive. The interest rate, I get random phone calls saying, you can now get loan forgiveness. And I just think it's all a scam and I hang up the phone. But even with that, I still have to pay on my loans for a certain amount of time. And the interest rates tends to be a little bit more higher. I got it to where it was a lower and it's at a set interest rate, thank the Lord. But even that is like, and you have to work for a certain hospital as well, which can be quite stressful between working for a government hospital versus working for a nonprofit hospital. If I work for a nonprofit hospital, I can't get my loans forgiven. But if I work for a government hospital or a state hospital, I can be eligible for forgiveness. And even that, I have to still pay on my loans for 10 years. So being the person that I am, I have the faith of a mustard seed that these loans are going to be forgiven. So I pay my little minimum payment every month because I just know Congresswoman Ayanna Pressley, I know you're going to make a way for these loans to disappear. So I believe I'm not going to pay the government all this money back. I'm just not going to do it. So just my own personal experience it's crazy because I am looking into buying a home and they do look at that. And currently that's my major debt right now, which is my student loan debt. And I want to go further and get my master's degree. I don't know what but even I'm taking into consideration the type of debt that I will have to put myself more in if I want to go and get my master's degree, because I want to make sure I can actually use my master's degree, because I don't want to pay all this money for this master's degree and I still have to pay all this money back. So Canceling student loan debt it's a big thing in the Black community. I didn't know it was a big thing until I started researching myself, and I started asking, my other colleagues that I work with, compared to the people that look like me and the other people that don't look like me. I will share a personal experience. We were at work, and another one of my friends, we were talking, and we were all talking about student loan debt. And it was two colleagues that was there that did not look like me and stated that canceling student loan debt would be unfair because they've already paid their loans off. And we really just didn't say nothing because we're at work and it's not the time nor the place to say anything. But for me, it was just like, well, it's not fair for, the Black borrower to have to pay this loan debt because they further stated, well, those people, they should have been saving and all these type of things. But sometimes I have to even tell myself that you have to educate those type of people because they don't know the story, like what you had to go to get the same degree that they have. Not everyone was raised the same. Not everyone was raised to save money for college and things of that nature. We're out here trying to better ourselves as African Americans. So even with that, I even think, canceling student loan debt, that's still going to cause some mix up. But I mean, if they wanted to pay all their money back to the government, kudos to them. But for us Black borrowers, it should be gone, finito, adios. It should just completely be eliminated. So.
Thank you so much, Brandy, for your amazing words. I'm seeing people in the comments saying, relatable, me too, same here. Somebody gets my experience. And so, thank you so much for your words, Brandy. I really love what you said. I'm a big person of chance. And so right now behind your screens, I want y'all to repeat after me. These loans will be forgiven. These loans will be forgiven. These loans will be
forgiven. These loans will be forgiven. Come on with the rally chant on a Zoom call.
I love it. I love it.
These loans will be forgiven, right? A while ago, they said it was too radical, and now it's becoming a main point in our political platform. And so we must.
Tiffany, we're gonna remix it with some smooth jazz, okay?
Oh, I'm ready, DJ. I'm already on it.
All right.
Yeah.
Let me get that ready, by the way.
Yeah, get it ready.
So we're getting to the point in our virtual town hall tonight where we're actually gonna field some questions from you all. And so again, if you're online, you're watching this right now, definitely go to that Q&A button on the bottom, click Q&A, type your question in, and we are going to field some questions. So the first question I have is for Congresswoman Presley. Is there any proposed legislation that includes relief for borrowers with private student loans?
Yeah, I appreciate the question very much. And so I know a moment ago I was speaking about the Student Debt Emergency Relief Act that Representative Omar and I introduced. And I mentioned that in the Massachusetts 7th, which I represent, there are 855 federal, well, in the Commonwealth rather, not just my district, the Commonwealth, 855,000 federal borrowers. But we know that within this 1.6 trillion student debt crisis, that 10% out of that 1.6 trillion is held by private student loan borrowers who lack the critical protections in the private market. And so before COVID, I introduced legislation to protect private student loan borrowers called the Student Borrower Credit Protection Act. Now, let me just say this, and that's because I serve on the Financial Services Committee under the great visionary, truth-telling leadership of Chairwoman Maxine Waters, and I'm gonna get to her in a moment. But my Student Borrower Credit Protection Act did pass the House. And again, it's focused specifically on private student loan borrowers repairing their credit after falling behind. And so why that matters is if we do, or when we do, see bold legislative solutions and responses in the name of closing our racial wealth gap, of racial justice, of economic justice, you'll still have, if you've defaulted, a poor credit score. So, for 7 years. And so the Student Borrower Credit Protection Act, which I introduced and which passed the House, again, does support our private borrowers in repairing their credit. And then also, we just, in our committee, Congresswoman Maxine Waters, for the relief package, what we are fighting for to be included in that is her bill, which would forgive $10,000 worth of debt for private borrowers, at least. And I know that is not enough, but under FSC, the only thing, and while I'm in Congress, that's under our jurisdiction on the FSC committee are those private loans. So I'm trying to get it both on the federal side and the private side. This is a drop in the bucket according to what the need is, but it's moving in the right direction, okay? So we hope that that bill will be included in the next relief package, and that would forgive at least $10,000 worth of debt for private borrowers. And then again, Representative Omar and I continue to advocate, and there has been growing consensus around student debt cancellation. And we're saying at a minimum of $30,000 for federal borrowers, because that's the average amount that people are saddled with.
Thank you so much for the information. The next question is going to be for Dr. Davis. So shout out to Ella Azula, I believe that's her name. There's a question, thinking about this current pandemic and the fact that everything is digital now, how can young advocates be disruptive in our activism around Black student debt?
Yeah, great question. It's probably one I've gotten most frequently doing some of these Zoom interviews. And so I think one really important way, well, let me say this first. One, we don't want to assume that things have not already been happening in virtual and digital spaces, right? We know that through groups like the Dream Defenders, through BYP 100, that much of the organizing that's happening is across the nation through these digital platforms and even locally. And so I think one particular thing that's really important is that we use the opportunity to convene virtually to up our critical consciousness and engage in activities of political education. And so even this particular forum, right, provides some sense of what's been going on in the policy world and how we can be engaged and involved. But we want to use this as an opportunity to further edify ourselves, right, to get more knowledge or better knowledge, as some elected officials have said, around the issues that are going on, and really get sort of the nuanced understanding of what's been happening, right? We have sort of the masthead of the issues that are going on, but just like student loan as a crisis affects a lot of folks, it particularly affects Black folks. So we want to be able to convene people, engage in sort of virtual teach-ins. We can engage in issues, bring in experts and other folks who are willing to do that. I know myself, I'm certainly willing to engage with you all in your campus community virtually to talk about some of these issues. But I think other ways are to think about tactics that can almost exclusively be happening online. And there's a number of those that are happening. A lot of them are around narrative change and narrative shift. And so returning to the work of the Dream Defenders, an amazing organization of Black and brown folks down in Florida, that we can control the narrative by participating in the same ways we do already on Twitter, on Instagram, on Facebook, but really helping people see the issue from our perspective and our point of view, right? There was not a conversation about it being a Black student debt crisis until those folks already took the mantle and started developing graphics, infographics that they were sharing, hosting virtual forums like Sunday School, which the Dream Defenders host occasionally. I think Tiffany's actually been a part of that in the most recent installation. And so I think that also gives us a space to take control of the narrative, where we know that most news reporting agencies are not going to position themselves as allies for us in this work, and that we have to control what is being said about who we are, how we show up, and how this thing is directly affecting us. So I think that's really important. And the third piece that I want to mention is being able to form coalitions. So one of the things that technology affords us is an opportunity to access and engage with people across space and time, much like we're doing right now. So in what ways can we begin to develop and strengthen our coalitions so that we can recognize that this issue extends within and beyond our communities? We can align ourselves with people who are similarly situated, and we can all direct our energy towards a common oppressor. And I think that are three particular important steps that will help us leverage the virtual format that we have right now, in ways we can organize and still remain active while social distancing is taking place.
Thank you so much for that, Dr. Davis. I'm so glad that you mentioned narrative. So the next question is actually for Dr. Jones, is why is it important to change the narrative around who is impacted by the student debt crisis?
Yeah, absolutely. I think a couple of reasons. One, I think there's some folks who are concerned that if you forgive student debt, for example, that there's a benefit that's going to go to people who don't need it. Because the perception is those who have access to higher education are privileged. Those are privileged individuals who don't need any type of support or assistance. And so it's really a conversation we had today to talk about what's the experience of Black people, though, as it pertains to higher ed and affordability and debt, because that's not like everybody else, right? So it adds some nuance to the conversation. So it's really, really important that people kind of get some facts behind some of their assumptions, that there are people who've gone to higher education, some have earned graduate and advanced degrees and continue to struggle financially because of how unaffordable higher ed has been. While there's folks outside these conversations who might assume if someone has a PhD or a doctor besides their name, or might be an elected official, they've all got it figured out financially. That's just not true. And it's just not enough that we are able to overcome all of the disadvantages that Black people face by going to college in one single swoop. And so that said, I think it's really important to have a conversation about who has debt and what their specific experiences are that's disaggregated, that takes into account issues around race. I think also it's important to have some additional intersectional conversations. I think Congresswoman brought up women earlier, specifically Black women as another particular group. We talk about who can't afford higher education, who's locked out of opportunities to pay. There's other marginalized communities within our communities of color, like undocumented individuals, like folks who are impacted by the criminal justice system, who, again, I mentioned the Pell Grants earlier as one way to help pay for college. It's not enough, but it's a good start. But again, if you're incarcerated and taking courses, you're not able to access the Pell Grant, right? So there's also additional parts of the community that we should also make visible in these conversations when we're coming up with solutions about how to make higher ed affordable in terms of addressing the debt we already have or that we might accumulate in the future as we're trying to figure out how to pay for higher education.
Yeah, Dr. Jones, and Dr. Davis, I just wanted to build on that real quick and just say that the work around narrative, of course, isn't limited. And to your point about us being intentional and inclusive in our movement building, is that work that needs to be done around narrative is true literally for every issue. And what it all comes down to is the delegitimizing of Black pain. So whether you decide that the Black maternal mortality crisis only exists if you're a low-income, uneducated Black woman, if you are incarcerated, there are assumptions made about the family model with which you come from that puts you on that pathway. And the same is true in this essence. So I really appreciate your speaking to the need for just narrative work and the need for us to be intentional, because these fights and what we're doing, they're all interconnected. Please join me in advocating for incarcerated men and women to have access to Pell Grants. My father was incarcerated off and on for 14 years. He's someone that committed crimes to support an addiction, but he was no criminal. He's brilliant. He attained 2 advanced degrees while he was incarcerated, went on to become a professor of journalism and a published author. And that is what happens when those investments are made. So all these issues are interconnected, and that's exactly how we need to mobilize and movement build. But I so appreciate you bringing up narrative.
Yes, we love it. We love it. And people in the comments are loving it too. And so that actually brings me to my last question, Congresswoman Presley. We actually, in thinking about narrative building, how do we ensure that policymakers see Black student debt as a civil rights issue, right? The NAACP is a classic, the oldest, boldest, civil rights organization in the country, right? How do we get our young people and our advocates and activists and advisors and everybody who's on this call tonight to talk and work with their policymakers to make sure that they know that it's a civil rights issue?
Well, I mean, I think, freedom, mobility, those should all be essential. They're civil rights. And that's really, for as long as we're choked by debt in all its forms, but especially student debt, how can we realize those things? One of the things that I find so frustrating and why I push so much around policies and just embedded infrastructure in that way is right now, equity is left to the charity and the benevolence of whoever's in charge. And that's not good enough. That's just one more way that our power is being given away. And we've already been robbed of so much. And so how do we advance an issue like student debt? I think, again, it's about being intersectional, and it's about, in the context of it being a civil rights issue, we borrow more because we have been denied the opportunity to build generational wealth. And that shame is on the hands of the federal government. And so that is why it is a civil rights issue. It's not only reparations and reciprocity, but it is what is just. And I would also just encourage us to just remember that even though this is within the frame of young folk, that this burden is not limited to young folks. And that's the other problem, is that the movement of student debt gets co-opted and only defined by being a millennial issue. And that's why more folks aren't invested in it. Now, let me tell you, I led efforts recently, and it resulted in Betsy DeVos being sued, because in the midst of this pandemic, although we were able to get the Department of Ed to take over and to pause payments, they still continue the involuntary garnishment of wages and benefits. Now, when I say benefits, y'all are like, what's that got to do with me? Well, can you believe that there are senior citizens whose benefits are being garnished because of student debt they still owe? So and I'm 46 years old. And so this isn't a millennial issue. I have many, many peers that are still paying off those debts. And I only recently, paid off mine. So this is something that is following folks for generations. And that's why it's a civil rights issue. It's a systemic shame and problem. It requires systemic solutions, bold solutions. And it is not just a millennial issue. It is a Black family issue. This is about disrupting actively the cycle of intergenerational trauma, poor public health outcomes. I mean, debt is heavy, y'all. It is heavy. I'm confident. This weekend will be Mother's Day. Shout out to, all the moms. I'm a very proud bonus mom, whether you're a mom by blood or bond. I know you're nurturing, pouring into, mentoring somebody. So shout out to all the moms. I do want to say that. But, we have been passing on for a long time, instead of the generational wealth, intergenerational trauma. And I know that to this day, I don't like the sound of a ringing telephone, because it triggers me. And I think about, as a child, all the times I had to manage that phone line, running and hiding from debt collectors. And my mother, may she rest in peace and power, although cancer is what ultimately took her, she worked and worked and worked and owed everybody. And it never stopped. And I think she worked herself into an early grave. And so I don't say that to end on a somber note. I say that we have to move with urgency. We have to move with urgency, and so I thank you all for being a part of this. And again, thank our visionary leader here. We got the power of Tiffany going on today, so anyway, appreciate y'all so much. But this is a civil rights issue. It's a racial justice issue. It's a social justice issue. It's an economic justice issue. It's a housing justice issue. It's a healthcare issue. It's everything. It really is. I can't overstate that enough. So thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Wow.
We need you. Keep organizing.
That was deep. That was real deep, and people in the comments are loving it. When you go back and watch this on YouTube, y'all, please play that back, because it's deep. It's generational. It's historic. It's an issue that affects everything. And so thank you so much for your words. I wish we could have more time to continue talking about this. All of our panelists said amazing things. Please, give a round of applause for our panelists in the comments behind your computer. If you are streaming this on YouTube, on Facebook, definitely, show some love. We are very excited to think about, what are the next steps that you can take. And so I'm actually going to turn it over to my colleague and friend, Russell Boyd II, who is our field organizer for the NAACP Youth and College Division, to tell us how we can take some action.
And thank you, Wisdom. You did a great job.
Yes, thank you so much, Wisdom. And thank you so much to all the incredible panelists and their incredible words. I'm so happy to have shared this space with y'all and hear all the great wisdom you all dropped. I'm definitely fired up as ever to continue to be activated and mobilized around student loans. So with that, we do want to end on a very, very action-oriented note. We want to ensure that, you leave this conversation not only with knowledge, but some steps to take around student loan, debt, and ways that we can, take action. So first and foremost, Dr. Tiffany Jones is with the Education Trust, and they'll be having a Twitter town hall tomorrow. So we definitely encourage you all to join that. That's 3 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, 12 p.m. Pacific Time. We definitely encourage you all to get on into that and join that conversation. It's a part of the Black Student Debt Week, and we want to ensure that these incredible voices and stories and information is amplified. So we definitely want to have you all included in that. We also want to ensure that you all visit NAACPYC.org and sign up for our action alerts. There you can be up to date with everything going on NAACP Youth and College wise, and everything related to student loan debt and all of the great things that we have going on. And that also segues me to our next point, which we have these advocacy trainings coming up, in which we are wanting to teach folks how to advocate around issues and go and meet with their elected officials. And student debt will be one of those. So we definitely want to ensure that you get signed up for those, and you can get more information for those when you visit our NAACPYC.org and get those action alerts and more information. And lastly, we definitely encourage you all to join NAACP. We love to add additions to the family. We love to continue to have these voices and this power and these great ideas as a part of our family and our organization to continue moving this great work that we've been moving for so many years as an organization. And we definitely want to ensure that you all are included in that. And also we want to highlight, lastly, a study that is coming out, the national study on the Black student with Education Trust. As you can see, the link is there on the screen. We definitely want you all to check that out as well. It's going to be a very, very powerful study. And we want you all to share that and read up on it. And those are our actions at the moment. And again, I want to take the time to appreciate everyone who joined this call and all of our incredible panelists who gave so many great words of wisdom.
Thank you, Russell. I appreciate you. This has been an incredible hour, you all. I hope that, I know because I read the comments and that's why I was smiling and laughing, but I hope that you all took away new talking points for how we can continue to make this conversation around student debt as it pertains to Black borrowers more urgent. I love what folks had said in the panel. It's always an issue when white folks have an issue, but it's never a crisis when it's about Black folks. And so this is our conversation to own. The solution is in our hands. And as the Congresswoman stated earlier, those who are most in pain need to be closest to power. It is our responsibility to not only take the information we learned tonight, understand it, look up the information on the Twitter town hall that's going to happen tomorrow, look at the paper. The NAACP is going to continue this conversation. We have a few reports coming in the summertime. We're going to have more panels and discussions. We got petitions, there's Twitter town halls, there's YouTube videos, there's bills that are being introduced, there's committee meetings that'll be happening. There's a lot of stuff that's going on. And one of the questions that folks asked in the comments is, what can I do next? Russell just walked us through what those action steps are. We are not going to end student debt in an hour on May 6th on this conference call, but what we are going to do is build power. So the opportunity that you all had not only to register for this conversation and to watch it on YouTube is the beginning step. Thank you for taking the first. We're going to follow up with you all after this via email so that you have all the information that you need. You know how to follow up in conversations with the folks in your community, and you can ask them to also get involved. Again, I said this in an interview with The Root a couple of months ago when all of this pandemic stuff started. Just because we're physically distant does not mean we need to be socially distant. Now more than ever, while we are at home, it is our responsibility to make sure that we are preparing for the fall when school comes back, that we are making sure this country is not the same when we walked in. And most importantly, that all the folks coming after us don't have to fight this fight that we're fighting. So thank you all for your leadership. I want to again thank Wisdom for being a phenomenal moderator, for all of our, we keep saying guests, but none of y'all are guests. I know you all personally. So thank you all to the comrades that I have the pleasure of working with on a daily basis in this work. You all I respect you all deeply and looking forward to all the damage we're going to do to fix this country. I think it's going to be incredible. Congresswoman Presley, it was a true honor. Thank you so much for all your leadership. And thank you everyone for joining us tonight. God bless y'all. Be safe. And we will see you all on the other side of freedom. Thank you. Oh, wait, can all the panelists do me a favor? Because they want to take a screenshot. Everybody put your fist up in the air. Okay. And I'm going to say holla back. And I want you to say, I got your back. Okay. Holla back.
I got your back.
I got your back.
Holla back.
I got your back.
Holla back.
I got your back.
I got your back too. Have a good night, everybody.
Nice.
Thank you so much.
Nice.
Good night.
Y'all made me so full. I'm gonna be following all of y'all. You can't get away from me. Okay.
I followed you, Congress.
Okay. All right.
Whatever you need, let us know. Literally.
Yes,
whatever you
please.
need.
Thank you. Thank you.
All right.
I'm gonna be the last one off.